Welcome back to the Black Line Blueprint. In this episode, we are talking about how I help people train around shoulder pain. So, shoulder pain doesn't always mean that you have to stop training. It just may mean that you need to make some modifications to what you are doing in your training. In this episode, I'm going to tell you exactly the framework that I use when dealing with clients that have shoulder pain. So, let's get right into it. So, the first thing that we have to think about, and the first thing I want to say and mention is that this isn't medical advice, folks. Okay. So, if you do have some severe shoulder pain, you may want to get a medical evaluation, maybe go to a physical therapist, or maybe go to some type of orthopedic place to get that looked at. This is just the framework that I use when I have clients with shoulder pain. So now you can keep in mind that you can keep training, but we need to know what the green flags are and the red flags. So some of the green flags would be pain that is mild, improves with your warm up, stays localized, and returns to baseline within 24 hours. So those are the green flags that may signal to you that this might just be something that needs some time to heal and you got to make some modifications to work around. And then the red flags would be significant weakness, trauma to the area, to the shoulder, dislocation of the shoulder, neurological symptoms, or severe worsening pain. Okay, so those are the red flags. Seek medical evaluation if you have those red flags. Okay. All right. So once we got those out of the way, we know that we can keep training, right? We know that, okay, we got the green flag. We can keep training. We need to make some modifications. What do we do? So we have to identify, or I usually identify, the aggravating movement. So the aggravating exercise. So which exercise actually hurts? Is it the bench press? Is it the barbell overhead press? Which movement actually hurts? Then I can pinpoint where in that movement does it hurt? Is it the bottom of the bench press when I'm coming off of the chest? Is it the top of the bench press right once I unload the bar and I'm coming down onto the chest with the barbell? Is it halfway up the lift? I have to figure out where in the lift specifically does it hurt, because that's going to determine what modifications I actually make. And we'll get into those a little bit later in this video or this episode, video and episode. So, and then how severe is it? So is it a sharpshooting pain? Is it a debilitating pain? I think once we got into the red flags, it should more than likely be something that is kind of mild, but the type of pain that you feel can change up how you navigate the modifications. And then does it happen during that specific movement, or does it happen after you complete the movement? Like you start to feel a little bit of achiness in the shoulder. Or do you feel it the next day? Do you feel some achiness the next day? That will also determine what we decide to do as far as the modifications we use. Okay, so you have to keep those things in mind. Which exercise hurts? Where in the movement does it hurt? How severe is it? And then during the movement, after the movement, or the next day, does it hurt? All right, so the modifications, there's about 6 modifications I usually make here. So the first one is reducing the load. I say this all the time when it comes to pain and modification. One of the biggest things is reducing the load. Why? Because it reduces the forces that are placed on that irritated tissue. Whichever tissue on the shoulder that is irritated, that just reduces the amount of force that is placed on that tissue. Okay, so you can do this simply by taking weight off of the bar or using lighter dumbbells, kettlebells, whatever implement that you're using, or just making a movement modification that lessens up the load that you're performing that movement under. So less weight, just take some weight off of the bar and then perform the movement again and see if that reduces the pain symptoms. If it does, congratulations, you found the modification that you needed, and it is probably more so a load tolerance issue than some, maybe let's just say a strength issue in a specific muscle group, or maybe a mobility limitation, or a multitude of different other variations of things that it could be, right? The next thing would be to slow the tempo down. So instead of, for this specific movement, just taking weight off the bar, you can slow it down, and that'll force you to actually use lighter loads. So if we're doing the bench press, on the way down to the chest, we can take a 3-second descent. So three 1,000, four 1,000, two 1,000, three 1,000, right? All the way down to the chest. And then on the way up, 1,000, two 1,000, three 1,000. In that, we get better control throughout the movement. So we're coordinating the movement a lot better. So let's just say if the issue might have been some type of motor control issue, right now we're not diagnosing what the actual issue is of your pain because that is out of the scope of this video. I am a clinician and a therapist that works in physical therapy. But when it comes to training, people who are fitness coaches, personal trainers, strength coaches, whatever it may be, it's not within the scope to actually diagnose or solve pain. You modify the movements to work around pain. So simply stated, if you have or a fitness coach or a personal trainer or somebody that's telling you that, oh yeah, we could just do this to fix your pain, let that go in one ear and right out the other because they are out of their scope and they're out of line, okay? Because they're, like we talked about in the red flags, there are so many things that could actually go wrong with that they aren't educated to diagnose. And me as a PTA, I'm not educated to actually diagnose an issue, but I am educated to learn and know exactly what specific conditions a patient may have and what we need to do as far as working around that. So it translates better over into my coaching. That's why the modifications are the biggest thing. Okay, back to the main point, or back to the episode. So pauses. So pause on the chest with the barbell, right? So we're gonna keep with the bench press ideal. So we pause on the chest with the bench press for 3 seconds, and then we press off of there. Maybe now we learn that we weren't having that much tension in the bottom, and that may have been causing some type of irritation to the shoulder, or just distributing the forces on other tissues that may not tolerate it, okay? So those are the 3 ways that we think about reducing the load. Just taking some weight off of the bar, slowing the tempo down of the movement by either doing a slow descent and a slow ascent, as well as we could also do pauses, or we can just force ourselves to do higher repetitions, which is gonna, most of the time, have us using lighter loads than we would. So instead of doing like a tough 5 repetitions, maybe we do a tough 10 repetitions instead, okay? So the next thing that we're getting into is the other modification, which is reduce volume. So we can reduce the volume in a multitude of ways, but reducing the volume just reduces the overall stress that accumulates as you continue to do more repetitions. Let's just say in the bench press or the overhead press, the more repetitions you build up on the shoulder, the more stress that is placed on that area, and it may just not tolerate that much volume. And that goes into if the pain is a next day pain instead of like actually when you're doing that movement, or let's just say at the end of your workout after 3 different pressing exercises, now you start to feel that pain. Now you can start to think, okay, maybe this thing is a volume issue. This is the key factor that I'm trying to get across here. It's how my mind works when it comes to pain and modifications. So that way you can have a way of thinking whenever you have pain and how to modify when you go through your exercises. And, you know, let's just say you don't have the time or the ability to go seek out some guidance in that area, and you have the green flags going on. So that way you know what you need to do to modify it instead of trying to find some magic exercise, because there is no magic exercise to try and fix this pain. It's more so a combination of a lot of things that you have to do, okay? So back to the point of reducing volume, so fewer sets. So let's just say you're doing 5 sets of 5 repetitions. Maybe now we just do 3 sets of 5 repetitions, right? And then we see how we feel during the exercise. Most of the time, reducing the volume is like after the exercise or the next day. If 3 sets of 5 reps was good, you don't have any pain or not as much pain the next day that you did before, okay, maybe we need to just keep the volume a little bit lower for a couple of weeks and then gradually increase the volume back. Or if we're getting the same amount of strength gains from that movement, let's just keep that volume there. Why do we need to add more volume if we're getting the same results? So the next thing is the repetitions. So we reduce the amount of repetitions as well. So let's just say, or fewer reps, yes. So it's in opposition to reducing the load, right? So in this case, let's just say we had 3 sets of 12 reps. And by the last set, we're pretty fatigued. Let's just say during the last couple of reps, we start to feel a little bit of pain. So maybe we do 3 sets of 8 repetitions, keeping the same load that we've been using because we don't want to try and modify so many different factors. And then if at 8 reps we feel pretty good, we don't really feel that discomfort like we felt with the 12 repetitions, we can reduce it that way. And that now we have less overall volume for that whole entire set. So that's about a good 4, 8, 12 repetitions fewer than what we were doing before. And that added up over the week can be a lot less stress on that shoulder. And then the next thing is just weekly sessions. So the frequency, right? So if I'm bench pressing or overhead pressing or pressing in general 3 days a week, maybe I reduce it down to 2 days a week. And if that resolves some of the issue, then I may be good there. But if it doesn't, maybe I need to reduce it down to 1 day a week. And if that helps, then I know let's just stick here for a couple of weeks or so, and then see if we can add in another day and see how the shoulder feels from that. So reducing the volume. So the next thing is vary the exercise, right? So this, like I said earlier, just changes up where the forces are going to be placed on across the whole entire shoulder, right? So varying the exercise can look like changing the angle of the exercise. It can look like changing the implement. So dumbbell bench press instead of a barbell bench press, or a cable press instead of, dumbbell or barbell press, or even a landmine press instead of, let's just say, an overhead barbell press. Then the other way we would do this could be changing the grip or arm position of the movement. So when we do the bench press, instead of having our arms flared out to the side, maybe we bring them in closer to our rib cage as we do the bench press. So again, this just changes up where the load and the force is placed on the shoulder. So changing the angle, one of the biggest effects that I've seen on shoulder pain has been, especially with the bench press, changing people's shoulder angle from being all the way up at about shoulder height, or flared out. If you can envision yourself on the bench press with your arms flared out or your elbows in line with your shoulders, think about bringing them all the way down until they're almost at your side, but maybe have a little space there. In that position tends to be less stressful on the shoulder, as far as from what I've seen with a lot of the people that I've worked with. So the same thing with the dumbbell. So if you're doing dumbbell bench press, you can do the same thing and bring them in, and you have more freedom of movement with that too. So when it comes to dumbbells, when it comes to cables or even kettlebells, you have more freedom of movement in the shoulder. So let's just say you have some type of mobility issue from left to right, or some type of stability issue from left to right. Now you have the ability to move a little bit more freely because you aren't using a barbell that has you locked into position. So that tends to sometimes eliminate the issue altogether as well. Now, again, it doesn't mean you have to completely stop barbell bench pressing, but again, we're just trying to modify for the time being until that tissue builds back up some capacity and some tolerance, and then we start to bring back into that movement that we were doing before. So the next thing that we were talking about with the varying the exercise is changing the grip in the arm position, and that kind of goes in line with what I said before. So if, let's just say, you're doing a dumbbell press overhead, so the arm position is out to the side a lot of times when it comes to people who are thinking about more so, let's just say, bodybuilding style of workouts. But if we're thinking about just overhead strength and function and performance overall, and even like with size and muscle, you can bring the arm in. So you have, let's just say, your fist is out in front of you, and now you can press up overhead in that position. So it's just another way of modifying the movement that puts a little less stress on other areas that may be highly irritable at the moment. Okay. So the next thing is reduce the range of motion. So this one, again, if you have mobility limitations, or if, let's just say, a certain position in that movement, like we talked about before, is the issue. Let's just say the bottom position, the very bottom position of the bench press is the issue to where you start to get that pain. Maybe doing a floor press might be the option for you. So we can do a floor press. Let's just say it's the bottom position when it comes to the shoulder press. So when the barbell is right at the shoulder and press it off of the shoulder, or even going down to the shoulder is the painful portion. Maybe instead we're doing pin presses. So we have the barbell on some pins, and then we're pressing up from that top position. That's more of an advanced movement, but you get the idea. You can start at a higher position. The same thing would be with dumbbells as well. With dumbbells, you have a little more control, so you don't have to press from directly down at the shoulders. You can keep the dumbbells higher and you can just press through the range that feels comfortable for you, and then you can just bring them down. Now, that one's going to be really stressful on the shoulders as far as like the fatiguing on the shoulders, not stressful, fatiguing on the shoulders. But you get what I'm saying? You can continue to train that movement pattern, but all the while avoiding the position that's irritating the shoulder. And that would go into partial range of motion too. Okay. So the next thing is substitute the movement. So this kind of goes with, using different implements. But again, think about, instead of a barbell bench press, maybe we're doing dumbbell bench press, or maybe we're doing kettlebell bench press. Maybe we're doing the floor press. If we're doing overhead movements, maybe we're doing a landmine press instead, or maybe we're doing an incline dumbbell bench press. We're still getting some good shoulder training, but we're not necessarily training in the position that causes us the most issue. So substitute the movement. The other thing, like the other extreme, would be, for the time being, maybe we just go to rows, right? Or isolation work when appropriate. So if a lot of pressing is just, regardless of all the modifications you've tried, a lot of the pressing is irritating, maybe we're just doing row variations, right? We're doing more rowing, and then maybe we just isolate the area. Maybe we're doing flies to get the pecs working. Maybe we're still doing some tricep extensions to make sure we're still training the triceps. Maybe we're doing some front raises to still get the delts working. So for the time being, if the shoulder does not tolerate any of the pressing variations or the modifications that we tried, maybe we can just do some of the isolation work as well as do more row variations. And I've had this, speaking outside of the shoulder, with one of my clients who had some elbow discomfort, and a lot of the pressing, regardless of what it was, irritated it. So we just made an adjustment for the time being, and let that tissue calm down. We did some cable flies variations. We did some tricep work with the cables, whatnot, and that helped the shoulder feel a little, or that elbow feel a little bit better. But in regards to the shoulder, the same concept can kind of go hand in hand with that. All right. So when we're doing these modifications, we're just maintaining the training stimulus to the shoulder, so that way we don't regress so far back, and we maintain the gains that we've had from training. Another option is using isometrics. I don't use this as often, but I have used it before with some success. So carries. Regardless of having pain at all, carries are just a good variation to get some good isometric strength in the shoulder, and to really just kind of deload the shoulder a little bit from all the pressing mechanics, let's say pressing and pulling. So let's just say an overhead carry, for instance. So if the bottom position was an issue, maybe pressing up overhead with the kettlebell or the dumbbell and doing some carries with that for distance and load, can be the option for now to still maintain some good overhead strength and stability while that tissue calms down. Let's just say if the bench press was the issue, maybe we're doing plank holds. So plank holds from the hands, or we're doing ring plank holds. So now we got a little bit more stability component going on with that movement there. Maybe we're doing weighted plank holds. So we got a little plate on our back and we're doing some plank holds from there. So, or maybe we're doing halfway, like midway push-up holds. So I've done this plenty of times, and this one is very challenging, but doing all of that allows you to still maintain some stability, some training effect on the shoulder. And sometimes the isometrics can actually calm down the irritated tissue. That's kind of getting into solving the issue, but just know that it can help kind of calm down the tissue while still maintaining some muscle activation. So sometimes isometrics in the place of the actual pressing movement that you're doing can be a good option as well. Oh, Turkish get-ups. I can't forget about those. Turkish get-ups or half get-ups. Those are some good options that I've used quite often, especially with the fighters that I've trained and I train now, because it helps them maintain some type of stability in the frontal pressing, horizontal pressing movement, without actually adding that more stress to that specific movement pattern because they do it so much when they're punching. Man, it was like hard for me to actually think about that idea I was trying to get out there. Okay, so those are like the main modifications that we are looking at there. Okay. So now, like you've made the modifications, you've modified for 2 weeks to 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks, and now you're trying to work your way back into the movement. How do we do this? As symptoms improve, this is how we gradually add things in. So we add the load, or if we change the range of motion, we start to add the range of motion back. If we change the volume, we start to add some volume back. Or if we reduce the amount of frequency that we were doing, then we increase the frequency again. So the load, right? Let's just say we reduce the load that we were using on the bar. We were doing 5 sets of 5 repetitions on the bench press at, let's just say, 155. And then we reduced it down to 135, and 135 was fine. So now what we do is let's just add 5 pounds to the bar and see how that feels for that 5 sets of 5 for that week. Feels okay? Good. The next week, add 2.5 or even 5 more pounds onto the bar. So 2.5 to 5 pounds onto the bar is usually what I would recommend for the upper body movements, especially for that shoulder area. Lower body, you can typically add more weight when you're trying to work around some pain and issues. But for the shoulder, typically 2.5 to maybe 5 pound increases on a weekly basis, not from session to session or from set to set, right? So you're not going to be like on your first set, you did 135, and then on your second set, you did 137.5, or you did 140. And then on the next set, you did 145. And then on the next set, you got to see how you tolerate that rep or that load throughout each set. So you do that for all your sets. The next thing is the range of motion. So let's just say we did floor press. So instead of just going, well, we can go straight back to the barbell bench press now from the bench press. But when we do this, reduce the load. So don't try and use the same load that you were using for the floor press. Use a lighter load that you were using for the floor press. And that can be anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds less. Okay. So 10 to 20 pounds less. And this is just throwing numbers out there. It can change for everybody, but 10 to 20 pounds less. And really what you can think about doing is starting to just work your way into the movement, really. So you press with the barbell. You add a little weight onto it. If you're using percentages, maybe it's 50% of your max. Maybe you go to 60% of your max. And you keep it at a level below 70% of your max when you're working back into that range of motion, right? Or let's just say 3 reps in reserve or 5 reps in reserve, however you want to mark it. Just think about it shouldn't be a max set when you're working back into any of these things in the range of motion, okay? Volume. So when we're working back into volume, let's just say if we reduced it down to 8 repetitions for the bench press, and now we want to go back up to 10 repetitions. Again, if we're doing 3 sets of 10 reps or 8 reps, keep it at that same weight and then do 3 sets of 10 reps. See how it feels for that day. Don't try and add all of the volume back at once, especially if we were doing, let's just say 12 repetitions. Don't try and add all the volume back at once, okay? The next thing is the frequency. So if we were traditionally doing 3 days for the bench press and we were doing bench press variations as well, and we went down to 1 day, now we go back and we add 1 more day in, but let's just say we do half of the volume that we were doing before on that 1 day we add back in. See how our body responds the next day and the day after that. Next week, now you add the volume back in to what you were traditionally doing on that second day. How do you respond? You respond well? Okay, good. And then the next day, you add half of the volume you were doing on that third day. How do you respond the next day? You feel okay, you feel fine, good. And then finally you get back to your volume. You see how this is almost a whole entire month or even 6-week process of you gradually adding the loading back in because you're trying to build back the capacity in that tissue that was irritated at first. And you're not trying to spike, and traditionally spiking the volume or spiking the load on that tissue is typically what will cause it to be irritated. So you want to gradually work your way back into it. So now did it work? And I kind of explained this before. Did the pain decrease when you made your modifications? Yes, you're good to go. Did it not decrease when you changed the range of motion? You reduced the load, you changed the range of motion, you use a different implement, you did a different exercise, and you tried all those things. Then now, when it comes to all of that, you might want to get an evaluation, especially if none of those things works. But usually, if it's something that doesn't have a red flag in it, and you don't have any major movement issues, and this movement wasn't painful at a certain time before, typically when you make some of these modifications and you do it correctly, you'll be fine. Typically over time, you just have to be patient with it. So if the pain did decrease and you gradually work your way back into it, and you don't end up spiking in volume again in any way, shape, or form with your recreational activities, and this is another thing that we need to talk about, what activities are you doing outside of your training as well? So outside of bench pressing or overhead pressing or dumbbell pressing, what other pressing or horizontal pressing movements or overhead movements are you doing that wears on that shoulder or puts load on that shoulder? Are you throwing a baseball? Are you spiking a volleyball? Are you throwing a football? Are you swimming? Are you playing tennis? Anything that requires you to decelerate with the shoulder. Are you punching a lot? Doing boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai. Anything that causes you to have to decelerate that shoulder joint is, a potential extra stressor that you may have. Or does your activity just involve a lot of shoulder strength and stability and mobility? Those things play a factor as well, because going back to the point, did the pain decrease? If you made all the modifications and your pain didn't decrease and you were still doing the same amount of volume of all the other things that you were doing, maybe you need to look outside of your training to the other things that you're doing and maybe try and reduce the volume, the frequency, the load that you're doing there. So if you're throwing a baseball, maybe it's how fast you're throwing it. Think it for the load. Maybe it's how many throws you're doing in general. So how much throwing you're doing as far as the volume goes. Punching. How much punching are you doing? How hard are you punching? So those things matter as well. So you have to think about those things when it comes to what modifications are you going to do when it comes to all of these things and the pain not decreasing. Going back to did it work? Did the symptoms return to baseline within 24 hours? So did you do your bench press modification and then the next day you feel okay? Within 24 hours, you're good to go and you're able to do your next training session with no issue. Great, we're on the right track. And can you begin progressing again? So once you feel good and you don't feel any irritation, did you try to make the modification of adding some volume back in or some load back in and you still felt okay? So yes, you can start progressing again because that tissue now can actually tolerate it. So if you're making those modifications and you see the decrease in pain, or you get a decrease in pain, but then afterwards you add some load, let's just go with the load thing, you add more load onto the bench press and that feels fine. And then the next week you add a little bit more load onto the bench press, but then you get a little bit more pain, you don't return to baseline within 24 hours, then maybe that means you need to stay at that lighter load for now, maybe for another week or maybe for another 2 weeks. So you just have to monitor like how your body's responding to these things and not get frustrated with the whole entire process, because it is a process. All right, so the key takeaway here is that you don't have to eliminate the movement altogether. Sometimes it's just about making that modification in order to get yourself out of pain and to keep training and keep making, strength gains, size, and just improving your overall performance and shoulder health. So if you want help actually applying the principles that I just said here, then you can book a free call with me by going to the link in the description or going to the link in the show notes. And this is a completely free call. You'll get on the call with me and we'll figure out exactly what's holding you back in your training right now, and what modifications you may need to make in order to get back on track and break through those plateaus that may be holding you back from reaching the performance goals that you have in mind. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.